If it often sounds like this when you start a new piece, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and you want to know how to turn it into this. Stay tuned. I'm here to walk you through a 4-step system that is guaranteed to help you sit down at the piano and know exactly how to practice to bring a strong sense of rhythm into your piano playing. Let's get into it. In case you missed last week's video, in that video I walk you through the 4 most common culprits that get in the way of your rhythm while you're playing. That's kind of the why rhythm starts to fall apart when we're playing. Today we're walking through the how exactly to approach it when you're learning new pieces. So both of these videos fit in really well together and help you really understand what's going on in your practicing situation. I wanted to make a video where I walk you through a common piece of music that also commonly gives piano students some issues with their rhythm while they're playing, and just take you step by step through how I would recommend practicing this music. So we're going to take just 4 measures, I think 4 measures, from Für Elise, and we're going to walk through exactly how I would recommend you approach this piece and the rhythm in this piece if you have any issues with it at all. This is a straightforward 4-step system. If you're learning a piece that's quite difficult for you, this process might take you several days, and I'll also teach you how to break that up and how to kind of distribute your practice. If you're learning a piece that's a little bit tricky but still well within your reach in terms of your technical and reading abilities, then you might be able to do all of these steps in one day. Just you kind of have to judge your own situation based on the piece that you're learning. Through each of these 4 steps, we're going to be baking rhythm in. We're going to start with rhythm and we're going to finish with rhythm. And if rhythm is something that gives you a little bit of trouble or something that makes you nervous when you're playing the piano, then I'm going to show you exactly how to approach this. So in Für Elise, we're starting in measure 28. I'm not going to walk you really specifically through the notes today because I do have an entire series that I'm preparing for Für Elise that will be coming out soon. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so and ring the bell so that you'll be updated as soon as that video is released. Part 1 will be coming out very soon. As I mentioned before, we're baking rhythm into every single step of this process, so let's just start taking things apart. Our piece is in 3/8 time. If you've never played in 3/8 time before, then it's important to address a few things. So 3/8 time works in a very similar way to 3/4 time. We have 3 beats per measure, but now instead of our quarter note receiving 1 beat like it does in 3/4 time, our 8th note is what we're counting as our main beat. That's what we're counting as 1. So whenever we see quarter notes, those are going to be getting 2 beats. When we see 16th notes, those are going to be half a beat now instead of a quarter of a beat. If you need more information on that, drop a comment below and I'll work on getting some shorts or some sort of tutorial prepared for you to help you understand rhythm and key signatures and time signatures and all of those things. But for today, what's important is we have 3 beats per measure and 8th notes are our main note. That's what we're counting as 1. Because we're baking rhythm into every step of this process, we're actually going to look at the rhythms before we play anything. We're starting with a quarter note, which we just learned receives 2 beats in this time signature, and then we have a dotted 16th note followed by a 32nd note, which can be very scary if you've never dealt with these things before. So don't freak out. You can just count it like you normally would 16th notes in 3/4 time. So for example, 3, E, and A. You can also count sometimes with dotted rhythms. I like to count 1, 2, 3, 4, just because there's 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and it can make us crazy. Then the next measure is 8th note, and then this dotted rhythm again. The whole measure after that is just 16th notes, so half beats on every single note. And we're only going to do the first 2 beats of the final measure, and those are 8th notes, so those are just 1, 1 also, or however you choose to count them. So then let's go through that and clap and count once. If rhythm is an insecurity that you have, clapping and counting is extremely beneficial. Will it fix every single problem overnight? No. But it's something, it helps us get the rhythm off the page into our bodies and we start to feel the rhythm. And the bigger muscles that you can involve in this process, the better, because fingers have incredibly teeny tiny muscles, and we tend to have trouble really getting the feel for rhythm if we've only ever felt it in our fingers. So even just by clapping, you're moving your hands, you're moving your arms, you're moving part of your upper body, and that helps us internalize rhythms. Okay, so let's give it a try. We have 1, 2, 3, and a 1, 2, 3, and a 1, and 2, and 3, and 1. It's actually not scary. You might want to do that a couple of times. You might just want to listen to me do it a couple of times and kind of clap along without counting before you try to bring in the counting. Whatever works for you, the point is you're internalizing these rhythms. Let's do a similar thing for the left hand, except there we actually don't need to worry about anything because it's just 16th notes the whole time. So that means as long as you're keeping a steady rhythm in the left hand, you're actually going to be getting everything rhythmically correct there. There's very little that can really go wrong. If you want to clap and count that, then you would go through and clap 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and for the 4 measures that we're working through. So that's phase 1 of step 1, just looking at the rhythms, thinking about the rhythms, trying to start to internalize those. This is going to sound very counterintuitive, but the other part of phase 1 is just reading through the notes and really not worrying about the rhythms very much at all. If you kind of have it in the back of your mind, that's good. You're going to be able to apply things more quickly. However, it's sometimes, as I talked about last week, the process of reading is what messes with our rhythm. So if you've never played through this section before and you've never worked through it before, focus on getting the notes right, and then you can bring in the rhythm after you've played through it a few times. Like I said, I'm doing a full-length tutorial on Für-Elise in the coming weeks, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the notes here, but you want to go through that process. So that might look something like this. An issue that you're going to need to work through is ironing out fingering, because fingering is also an element that can really interrupt rhythm. This section, I didn't have any trouble with the fingering because I played this piece before, but it's something that when you're sight reading, it might trip you up. There's some awkward little spots with the fingering. We have some finger changes that need to happen. That can slow us down. We have to think about it, process it, execute it, and then by the time we've done all of that, the rhythm has fallen apart. That's why we're not worried about rhythm right now. You're reading through the notes, you're ironing out the fingerings, you're finding what works really well for you. Then from there, we're ready to move on to the left hand. And so we're just going to repeat all of that process with the left hand. We already counted and clapped, and now we're just going to play through it. So you might have some pauses where you need to stop and think about the notes. Here, it's much less a question of fingering. There are a couple of awkward things to read, but for the most part, it should fall more or less into place. So we start with our F. The rhythm in and of itself is very straightforward. The notes in measure 27 get a little dicey, but once you figure out the fingering that you want there, I suggest 5-4-2 for that little back and forth with the crunchy chord in the middle. That works really well. Once you've got that down, then you're ready to go through in phase 2. So let's move on to phase 2. The right hand, we've ironed out the fingerings, we've gotten used to the notes. If you're playing a piece that's very difficult for you, this might take more than one day. You might want to spend a few days just going through the notes, making sure you got the fingerings down, and then on day 2 or 3 or 4, then you're going to move on to phase 2. Know yourself, see how it's going with your piece, and just tweak this however you need so that it serves you and that it suits your needs. In phase 2, we're focusing on keeping the rhythm really nice and neat while we're playing all of the correct notes. So then we start 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. With the dotted notes, if you feel that you're not keeping those as sharp sharp and as clean as they should be, keep counting the 16th note pattern. This 1 and a 2 and 3 and 1 and a 2. As an alternative to that, you can just count 1 and 2 and 3 and the whole time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and whatever method suits you is fine. As long as your ear and your hand are on the same page, everything's fine. Whether you're counting really precisely or whether you're keeping track of the big beats. Like I said before, I often feel like this micromanaging of the rhythm and really counting every single 16th note or every single 30-second note can be very distracting. It can actually hinder our rhythm rather than help us. Then you're just going to repeat exactly that process for the left hand. So we're starting on the F again, and we're just counting 16th notes the whole time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 the left hand is really nice and straightforward here. While you're on phase 2, you might notice, like here in this piece, that one hand has a more difficult rhythm than the other. That's fine. Just spend more time focusing on the rhythm of the hand that gives you more difficulties. I don't expect that you need a lot of help keeping 16th notes even here. The right hand probably needs more attention, and so do tweak your practice time accordingly and tweak your attention accordingly. I'm going to be a broken record today, but use your judgment. See how much you need to practice this step. Maybe you just repeat it for several times on one day and you're good to move on to the next phase. Maybe you need to practice this phase for a few days before you feel really comfortable moving on to the next one. Or you can also mix and match a little bit. Just because your main focus is on one of these phases doesn't mean you can't test out the others. It's always fun to test drive things, right? And just kind of try it out, see how it goes. Again, as always, use your judgment. For the purposes of the tutorial, we're moving on to phase 3, and phase 3 is the one where we're actually the least concerned about rhythm. We're mostly concerned about coordination here. And what I mean by that is I want you to get the right notes in the right order. So the notes that fall together need to happen at the same time. You want to make sure that that's happening everywhere. And then the notes that when one comes after the other, make sure that the right one comes after. So that we keep everything in order. So what that might look like is we're not counting, we're not worried about that, we're just kind of looking vertically as we go through which notes fall together. So the C, the first C in the right hand falls at the same time as the first F in the left hand, together, and then we have a lot of left hand. Then the next notes are together, left hand is alone, then the right hand is alone, and then the hands are back together. Left, together, left, together, left, right, together, and then all of these are together, this whole measure. Together, left, together, left. And so you want to make sure that the ones that fall together happen together. We don't want something like, shoot, those were supposed to be together. Those are also supposed to, that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid playing something that's actually supposed to be accompanied by another note on its own instead of with the note that it's supposed to fall with. That might also take a few repetitions. You might need to test drive that a few times. You might need to go slower. That's always something that we should keep in mind when we're practicing rhythm. When we're working on rhythm, if things aren't working out, go slower. Try to keep it as steady as possible. In this phase, in phase 3, the coordination phase, it's okay if it's not super steady, but you also want to avoid, for example, going really fast, and then stopping a little bit to look for notes, and then when it's easier, going fast again. That's also a very common error that students make, is playing the easy parts faster and the hard parts slower. Keep it as steady as you can, even if that means that you really have to pick a snail tempo and just go really slowly. With all of that said, we're ready for step 4, and maybe with one more thing said, you may notice we're on a different day now. I accidentally deleted this part of the video from the memory card. So here we are again. And step 4 is just bringing everything together with a steady beat. So playing hands together, you've ironed out the notes, you've ironed out your fingerings, you've ironed out the coordination, and every step of the way you've been freshening up the rhythm of the piece, and now you're ready to bring it hands together and keep it really, really steady and really hone in on those rhythms. There's not a lot to show you in this phase. Of course, I can sit down and play the piece rhythmically for you, but the main thing that I want you to keep in mind when it comes to this part is start slowly. Start slower than you think you need to go, because we want to make sure that you can get through an entire section, however long you choose, completely steady, without stopping to think about things, without stopping to iron things out. Now you're very decidedly sitting down and sticking to the rhythm no matter what happens. So if you play wrong notes, I would much prefer that you try to stay true to the rhythm than go around fixing notes at this point, because now our main focus is getting the right rhythm while playing hands together. This is maybe the 20th time I've said it in this video, but do this slower than you think you need to. You can always speed it up later, but it can be a very frustrating process to start too fast and to feel like, oh, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. And then you kind of start to get down on yourself. But if you choose a tempo that you know you can succeed with, then from there you can build it up and you can really develop it however you choose. So that might be even something this slow. It might even be slower than that. It doesn't matter what your tempo is, but what matters is keeping it really, really steady. Tools that you can use to help you in this phase: you can count out loud if you feel that that helps you. If you're trying counting out loud and it's not working, maybe try counting just in your head and see if you iron it out that way. Or maybe try recording yourself and playing it back and observing your rhythm kind of as a third person in the scene. You're not directly the person involved, you're watching and trying to judge that way how your rhythm is flowing. The metronome you could use. Not everybody loves metronome. It takes some getting used to. We do have to practice, we do have to learn how to play with the metronome. It can be distracting. If you're interested in how to work through that process and how to get used to playing with the metronome, let me know in the comments below and I'll start working on resources for you. But what's important to remember with the metronome is the metronome doesn't give us a sense of rhythm. It doesn't actually develop rhythm in our playing. We can actually become overly dependent on the metronome. The metronome is really much more a tool to test if we're keeping our rhythm like we want it to be. Are we really staying in time? Are we able to keep up with that speed? Things along those lines the metronome is really helpful for. I like to use the metronome to help me speed up pieces personally. I set it at a slow tempo and I manage that tempo a few times, and then I bump it up 5 beats per minute. And when that works well, then I bump it up again 5 beats per minute. In that way it's very useful, but don't forget, playing with the metronome will not gift you magically overnight a sense of rhythm. It's simply a tool for measuring how accurately you're playing your rhythms. As always, if you have any other questions about developing your rhythm, how to practice to improve your rhythm, how to bring more rhythm into your playing, drop it in the comments below or send me an email and I'm happy to get back to you with a few more ideas of how you can maybe approach this important skill. And until next time, happy practicing.